Welcome to episode 126 of the Hoop Threads podcast. Here with a good friend of mine, Jordan Divens, MaxPreps national editor. Jordan, how are we feeling today?
Good man, ready to answer some questions and get my name out there.
Alrighty, man. Well, yeah, it's a good opportunity to put a name to the MaxPreps teams rankings and a lot of the really good content coming out of that website. So let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning though. What got you into basketball?
Uh, Originally, I always played basketball my entire life. Growing up, I was a big Vince Carter fan actually, so that was kind of my first superhero of sorts. And then when I got into high school, I kind of started getting into it with my dad. I went to a couple events. The first event, big time event that I went to was the primetime shootout. Me and my dad would always go to local games when I was younger, just in the area, 30, 45 minute drive to good games and stuff. But then when I went to the primetime shootout, it kind of opened my eyes to what else was out there. And I kind of just fell in love with it from that and, started going to more big time events from there.
Where are you from? Did you play yourself?
Yeah, I played in high school. I mean, I'm only 5'8", so I wasn't anything special. But yeah, from Central Pennsylvania, Shippensburg High School.
Cool.
Uh, Backup point guard my senior year. I can't lie.
Shout out PA. All right, man. So you kind of got into going to different events and kind of taking the programs home with you. Talk about, starting your own website and building it up from there and kind of how that led into some of the internships and opportunities.
Yeah, I kind of just sat down one day and was like, "Hey, man, I need to learn how to create a website because I kind of had stuff that I felt like I could put out there and kind of wanted to build my brand a little bit. So I sat down one day when I was a freshman in college, actually, and just sat in one of the study halls and kind of just went into WordPress and just taught myself how to do it. And from there, I just started doing player and team rankings back then. I kind of was trying to do a little bit of everything just to get my name out there and to cover the sport that I loved. Um, and from there, it really just, it grew and I was able to go to a lot of events and cover stuff with the website, but that's how, it all started. And that's how I kind of grew my brand and branched out a little bit.
Okay. And that was High School Hoops Elite, right? Was the website?
Yeah, it was HS Hoops Elite. And yeah, I actually ran that until about 2016 when I started with MaxPreps.
Okay.
So it was about, 4 or 5 years there that I was running that. I enjoyed it a lot, but when there's no money at the end of the day, it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes, but I stuck it out until I was able to land my opportunity with MaxPreps. So
Gotcha.
great,
So
great step.
talk about starting with Max Preps, kind of what your responsibilities were at the beginning, and kind of how you were able to grow, not just the site, but your own personal kind of portfolio along the way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I first started at MaxPreps, it was actually in the middle of the season, where their basketball guy had left for another opportunity. So they knew me from, like I mentioned, the website that I was running. They had followed my stuff, and they offered me an opportunity to do the rankings, and that was my original kind of job was just national rankings, team rankings. So I came in January of 2016 and I started doing the team rankings. At the end of that year, they tasked me with doing All-American teams and Players of the Year and stuff like that. National Player of the Year, junior, sophomore, and freshman. So from there, it kind of grew to doing more game recaps, more day-to-day within the site. And from there, it grew even more to where now, I'm at games on the sidelines recording, and we use that the stuff that I get from recording these at these events on the site, and we can use that for video highlights or for game recaps, stuff like that. But from where I started to now, I kind of do a little bit of everything now, I feel like. Whereas when I was started, I was more just, the rankings guy, I felt like.
Okay. Talk about, when you took that job, kind of what were some of your ambitions? What are some things that you wanted to learn? You said that you kind of had done the rankings before. for your site, and you added in the recaps and stuff like that. But what were some of the areas of personal growth that you were looking to kind of step up into with that role?
I mean, to be honest with you, before I took over at MaxPreps, um, what I did was it was a hobby and it was something I loved. But now that it's my career, it's just so much different. Because the relationships you develop with coaches and it just every year it just gets easier because I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, or actually longer than that, where I do preseason rankings and stuff like that. So over time, it's just become something that's kind of second nature. Um, Whereas when I began, just learning everything at Max Preps and learning how big of a brand it it wasn't a huge difference going from HS Hoops to Elite to Max Preps as in what I was covering. It was more of how deep I was covering it. Before it was kind of from a 100-foot view. Now I'm trying to, name the best player in every single state. So it's, a much different um you know, just much different tasks and much different uh, more in depth, basically.
All right, we'll get back to the content in a second, but for the viewers that are going to be watching and listening to this that kind of want to do some of the same stuff that you're doing now, talk about a time that you kind of faced adversity within your career, maybe had some self-doubt, and some tools that you used to navigate through that time period.
So actually, when I graduated college, um, I had a job with a company called Flow Hoops, and I did that for a little bit, and then basically I had a change of management, and my expectations of what I was going to be doing with the company completely shifted. So I ended up leaving the company. And after I left the company, I was still maintaining my website, but I was actually serving tables for about 2 years after I graduated college. And I wasn't making any money off of my website, like I said. I was getting notoriety and everything, people were coming to it. I felt like I was respected, but I was close to giving it up. I really was. And then the year that Nathan Hale had that undefeated season, the Seattle Times called me and interviewed me and basically said, "Hey, we have 7 national polls. You're the last one. You haven't put out your final rankings yet." And just interviewed me about who I was going to pick. I picked Nathan Hale that year, and they basically said I was the deciding factor of the national polls. It was split 3-3. So, I was very close to quitting at that point, but my parents kind of talked to me and they were like, "Hey, like this is something you love to do. You're clearly getting seen. The Seattle Times is featuring you and different big names are featuring you. So maybe you should stick it out a little bit longer." And honestly, if it wasn't for my parents having that discussion with me, I probably would have pulled the plug a little bit earlier and I may never have gotten the opportunity at Max Preps. So I was actually very close to not covering high school basketball right before I started with Max Preps. So I would say that's easily the biggest hurdle that I kind of had to overcome because, you can only do your passion so long before, when the money's not coming in, you have to pay the bill somehow.
Mm. No, that it gets real out here for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we're going to get back to the Max Preps brand, kind of talk about some of the specific things that you think have helped grow the brand on the basketball side to kind of get it to the point where it's at now. And then as far as like skating to where the puck is going, that speech, like, what new types of coverage do you think will be big for Max Preps and then just in the general sports media landscape kind of coming down the line here?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the thing that I try to do with Max Preps is I want the brand to be respected and I want people to know that there is no bias at Max Preps. What we do is comes from a very professional perspective, and I want people to know that our basketball brand, that's what we pride ourselves in. But I mean, since I took over my spot covering basketball with Max Preps, I feel like as a brand, we continue to grow and try to be the source of high school sports. whether it is basketball, football, or, tennis or field hockey. We try to, cover every sport that we can. And I would say since I took over, I mean, our video coverage has grown exponentially over the last couple years. With me going to these events and recording and stuff like that, we didn't really have a huge presence of video on top players' profiles before. Now we're starting to make it an emphasis where if you go to a player's profile, we want you to be able to see their stats, we want you to be able to see their highlights, we want you to be able to see their photos. We really want you to be able to see the whole portfolio of these high school athletes and these top kids. So I think that we've done a lot better job of having more resources for people to look, not just you come to MaxPreps for schedules and stats. It's now you see the video, you see the photos, you see more, you see the articles and the features that we've done on these players. That's kind of where we're going and where we're trying to grow.
Talk about the off-season prep work that you do for your rankings, and then kind of the second part to that question is, how different is that process and formula, for the team rankings at the beginning of the year versus, as we get along through the year, kind of midway and toward the end of the season.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain the process of ranking teams in the preseason because it's such a niche market. I mean, you can't take your average high school basketball junkie, huge hoop head, and just tell them go rank teams. You have to have some sort of understanding of the program, the coaches, the player. Everything matters. Just because this team has 4 or 5 5 stars. Now that might be a little bit of exaggeration, but say they have 4 kids who are going D1. That doesn't mean they're necessarily a top 25 team in the country. You have to understand the tradition of these teams, and understand, coaching plays a huge factor in this. And another thing that plays a huge factor is your track record. I mean, there's always teams that come off the radar and just kind of jump out of nowhere and jump into the rankings at some point in the season. But for every one of those teams, there's at least 20 teams that, have the tradition, have been there, how they fare in the state playoffs typically. Um, and I'm not saying that their track record precedes them into the future and will have them ranked highly just because of that, but there's various things that go into the rankings for the preseason, and we're projecting in the preseason. Whereas as the season goes on, there is no more projection. Once you play the games, you can't, you can have the best players in the country at that point. You really can have the 5 5 stars at that point. But if you're losing games, personally, I don't see a reason to rank a team just because of, on paper, you think they're going to win games. It's about what you do with your schedule, who you beat, who you play, and your record, ultimately.
About the results ultimately. Gotcha.
Yeah, that's as the season goes on, it's about the results. In the preseason, it's more about, projections. I'd say that's the biggest difference for sure.
All right. What have you learned about the politics of high school sports and how to remain as kind of unbiased and neutral as you can be? It can be a little difficult when you build relationships with coaches and players, to kind of
Yeah,
stay impartial.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of my job, I feel, is to stay out of that. The politics are going to be there. I mean, in anything in life, not just high school basketball, but any aspect of life. For me, I try to, do I have good relationships with some coaches? Yes, but I'd never try to play any favorites. I don't like for coaches to give me feedback on their ranking if they think they should be ranked higher or lower. I try to be as fair as possible. If they want an explanation, absolutely, I'm willing to jump on the phone with a coach at any time and explain their ranking. But I think that my goal is to kind of remain behind the scenes where, these players are getting interviewed by all these different media outlets. If I really need to ask them a question, I absolutely can, but I can pick up just, what they're saying to other media outlets and stuff like that, rather than asking them a bunch of questions and developing relationships with these kids where I want to take it from a 1,000 foot view, be able to watch the kids, evaluate on my own, and not have any bias like, oh, I really like this kid, he's a good kid. No, I mean, obviously, you want the kids to be good kids, but that shouldn't have anything to do with where you're putting them on the All-American teams. It should be all about production, in my opinion. And that's why I try to kind of stay out of it while, you know, they know I'm a resource. If, a coach wants to reach out and talk, my door's always open.
Gotcha. Talk about balancing, how you watch games and, for me, it would be overwhelming just because there's obviously so many different teams playing all across the country. And you rank not just public school teams, but private school teams as well as prep teams. Talk about how you're able to balance that, like kind of what you've learned over the years as far as balancing that. And again, what tools you use to kind of maximize the amount of basketball you can see.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about, you have to know the big games that are going on. You have to have some type of schedule. I mean, whether it's you're going to these events or you're watching them online, each week you have to know what games are happening. You can't go into it blind. I'd say that's the first thing is just knowing what's happening where. You have to try to see. I mean, a lot of times on Tuesday, Friday night, like you're saying, I mean, there might be, you know, obviously there's probably hundreds of games going on, but it's prioritizing which games are the biggest, which games do I need to see. And then for me, something that's helped me a lot with tracking these teams is ranking more teams. We rank 100 on the back end. For me, that's something that when we rank more teams, there's a team that at the end of the season might not be, before they might have been completely off my radar. I didn't really hear a whole lot about them. And then they just jump into the top 25 because of a big win late in the season in the state playoffs or whatever the case may be. Now with a top 100, when you're tracking hundreds of teams a week because, obviously it's 100 plus the teams that are replacing them each week that you have to track. Uh, I think that really helps to provide more insight into every state, and that's the thing is sometimes you're not going to be able to track every good team in the country in the preseason. There might be a team from, Wyoming. I'm just throwing a state out there, but say Wyoming has this team that's, won 5 straight state titles and, they have a senior group coming in. I mean, Wyoming might not be on my radar, teams from Wyoming, but as the season goes on, um, and these teams establish an identity, you have to be able to try to pick that up as best you can, however you do it, whether it's you see this team, you hear about this team, your ears have to be down, you have to listen to people in their areas. I think that's a big thing that people don't do well is, you know, if there's somebody in the Philadelphia area or the DMV area like yourself, I have to trust that you've watched more games in your area than I probably have watching all 50 states because my scope is so much wider than people in these areas. So I try to lean on people and when I'm in these areas talking to people, I try to lean on their expertise too and see who they think the best players are, who they think the best teams are in their region. I think that matters as well.
Cool. Let's discuss the rise of independent schools and what you think they can kind of provide for student athletes kind of coming up in the high school scene today. Because, even 10 years ago, there's no NIBC. And even, what was it, 2 years ago, it kind of evolved into is it Nike Scholastic League?
Yeah.
Uh, so kind of talk about the rise of the independent schools and what they can do for student athletes.
Wow, it's incredible. Covering this sport for, over 10 years now. The rise of the academies and the prep schools is wild because I mean, when I was first coming up, there was only a select few, and now there's, you can count 20, 50, I mean 100 depending on which teams you're including, So I think that for example, like you mentioned, the Nike EYBL Scholastic, I think that's a good example of a great resource for kids because if you think about it, all these kids and all these games are being televised for the coaches to potentially see. So even if you're not playing on, Montfort Academy, who's usually at the top of the group, even if you're on one of the teams that usually finishes in the lower half of the Nike EYBL Scholastic, you're still having opportunities to get seen by these college coaches. And ultimately, that's, I think, the goal of a lot of these kids is, to make it to the next level, especially if they're going to one of these big programs, like I mentioned, a Montverde, an IMG, a Prolific Prep. If you're going to one of these programs, I think your goal is to play at the next level, most likely. And I think these programs give you a good opportunity. And a lot of these programs have proven coaches with a track record of developing players. So if you pick the right program, I think it's a great opportunity and a great tool. Uh, I will say the only downside to that can be I think some of these programs do over recruit some. And I think that you have to be um, smart as a player, be self-aware, and know, what team you're coming into. If you're coming into a team with five top 100 players and you're a three-star trying to make a name for himself, you have to think, is this the best situation? Am I actually going to get seen here or am I going to get buried on the bench, So there is two sides to it, but I think overall it gives kids a great opportunity to showcase themselves and give them an experience of playing the top level kids in the country before college.
I think there's something to be said too for like the traditional high school experience, being in classrooms with, your classmates, being there all 4 years, being the hometown hero, playing at the same high school as, your parents did or, family members of your did, kind of continuing that legacy. I think in some situations it can mean more. But yeah, like you said, I mean, in certain situations for student athletes, it can be better to prepare them for college and prepare them beyond that, because they're going to be playing a national schedule. Maybe the strength and conditioning, the diet stuff is much better than what they would have before. But I think
Yeah,
it's very much a situation by situation basis.
I
Uh,
agree. And just to follow up on what you just said, I
yeah,
think that that's a great point. I mean, uh, even if you're the best player for a prep school, say an Oak Hill Academy, say that you're the best player on the team that year, I will say that yeah, you might be celebrated on campus that year, but Oak Hill Academy's had so many legends come through. The likelihood that you're going to be remembered as a hometown hero going to an academy is a lot less likely than if you stay at your high school. I mean, if you win a state title for your high school, say they haven't won in 50 years, you're going to be celebrated for the rest of your life. There's just no doubt about that. So I do think that there's also a huge value in staying at your high school for sure.
I'm really excited to hear your feedback on this one. Share with some of the coaches, high school coaches that'll be tuning in, the benefits of players' stats being put online. The key complaint being that coaches don't want to put their kids' stats on MaxPreps and other sites, kind of as public information because it helps them be scouted. Talk about some of the virtues of that and how it can help their players get recruited.
So I think that, well, first off, not even going to the stats roster. Just make sure you have your correct roster in first off. I mean, and you laugh, but I mean,
It
it's serious.
shouldn't be this hard, man. It really
It,
shouldn't
and
be difficult.
it's really like my thing is when you don't put a roster in, if someone's watching your team and they see a player who's a sophomore or a freshman who they never heard of, and he's named, Joe Banks, but his real name is something else. How are they ever going to know who they're looking for on your team? But I mean, deeper than that, the stats, like you mentioned, even for someone like me, when I go in at the end of the season, obviously I try to reach out to as many coaches as I can to get stats for top players. But obviously, there's going to be some names I miss. And especially, maybe not so much for the senior class, but especially for the uh, lower classes like sophomore and freshman, information about these kids is not out there as much as we would like to think. I mean, there might be some rankings out there or some sources of, telling you who these kids, the top kids in the country are. But for the most part, when I'm doing this research, being able to see these kids' stats at the end of the year and not having to reach out to a coach. Because if I have to reach out to the coach, the thing is, it's easy to miss a player. If I'm just looking at a player's profile and I see their stats, it's pretty much impossible for me to miss them. Because, the stats are readily available. I can compare them against their colleagues and their classmates. And, even throughout the season, if if you're worried about another team scouting you, I will say there's plenty of things you can do. You don't have to put in your free throw percentages for your players. You don't even have to put in their field goal percentages. literally just, points, rebounds, assists, simple as that, goes a long way. And I think, there's a lot of kids out there that might be seniors who are getting overlooked, especially now with how they, after COVID, there's the fifth year and there's been a lot less opportunities for high school kids. But, if you play for a high school and you lead them to a 28-0 record and you average 25 points per game, say, even if you don't get that Division 1 look, there might be a Division 2 or Division 3 coach out there who's just scouring MaxPreps looking for a kid, looking for, that gem. And if you don't have your stats in there, then there's one less opportunity for that kid, in my opinion.
Mm. Just taking opportunities off the table, like you said.
Yeah.
What are some of the events that you enjoy going to the most?
So I'll give you three that I really, really enjoy. The City of Palms Classic is always a very good event because, it's a tournament style, which is rare for high school events. A lot of them are showcases where it's just a one-off game for these teams. A tournament format is so much different because the games are just so competitive. Uh these teams, they know if they win the City of Palms, they're most likely going to be the number one team in the country coming out of that weekend. So it means something to these kids. And the atmosphere is great. Plus, it doesn't hurt that it's down in Florida during December. I mean, that never hurts anything. Another one that I'll say, the John Wall Classic, the Holiday Invitational, man, that atmosphere. Uh, they packed the gym. North Carolina, big basketball state. Uh, they pack that gym and everyone's standing the entire games. People are there's always mixtapes there. People in the crowd always trying to get on the mixtapes, trying to uh jump
React.
up and down and react the craziest. But if you're talking about just an atmosphere and you want to experience an atmosphere for an event, that's can't beat John Wall, honestly. And there's always some good competition there too. And the third one I'll mention is the Spalding Hoopball Classic. That's kind of a combination of the two. It's not a tournament, but it's the best teams in the country all coming under one roof. Uh, the gym is completely standing room only. And I mean, honestly, you get to see 8 high level games every day that you're there, usually. Saturday, Sunday, Monday. It's going to be all good games, all teams that have highly ranked players, probably highly ranked in the national rankings as well, team rankings. And the thing about the hoop hall is they just the atmosphere of it being at the Springfield, the Basketball Hall of Fame, it just brings something else out of it. Now I will say, like the City of Palms, it's the opposite. It's in January in Massachusetts. So that's the only downfall. You don't want to go outside the gym, but as long as you stay in the gym, you're good.
I'm from upstate New York, man. That's not a problem for me. All right. So let's say you're the czar of high school basketball for a day. What are some things that you're changing about the game?
I think that we have to have a little bit more uniformity across high school basketball. Um, I would say, first off, I think that there should be some type of limit on, every kid should be able to get opportunities, but there should be a number of games limit, in my opinion. I think that sometimes certain programs will, whether it's AAU or high school, sometimes games can, add up very quickly. And when you're going from your high school season straight to AAU with no break in between, in my opinion, I think that, we talk about in America versus Europe or, what's wrong with American basketball. I think that we emphasize live play, playing games too a little bit too much, whereas we could do a little bit more with skill development. I think skill development is sometimes missing because we emphasize always playing in competition. Um, I also think, you know, with the shot clock coming around in high school basketball, I do think it would be good for that to be uniform as well. Uh, I've seen in the past the EYB will have a 24-second shot clock. Other places will have 30, 35. I actually do think that 35 seconds would be the best for high school. Because these kids are still learning. I mean, 24 seconds, in my opinion, even if you're at the highest level, I don't really agree with it. I think that's a little too quick for high school kids. I think they'll force up some bad shots in 24-second shot clock. Whereas if you give them 35 seconds, they have more time to get work the ball around, find the open man without forcing, an isolation situation where, you just have to give it to your best guy with 5 seconds left and he has to make something happen. Uh, but I think that basically just uniform rules across the board. I mean, I also think that I don't know how to, with college, the transfer epidemic is kind of run rampant. I feel like high school kind of has a transfer issue as well. Uh, I think it would be very, very hard to rein that in. But if I was the czar and I had all the say in the world, I mean, I do think it would be healthy to put a limit on, I don't think it's good for a kid to transfer to 6 different schools in 4 years.
Yeah.
Now, is there kids that go to 3 different schools and there might be good reason for it? Absolutely. But at the same time, I do think that, there's a benefit to sticking it out, waiting your turn, or working for, your time instead of just going to the next opportunity. And I think that because we allow that to happen in high school, I think that's kind of trickling to the NCAA as well. I think that if we could cut it down at a younger age, it might help it a little bit at the next level too.
I think putting actual like birth year age limits in AAU versus 15U, 16U, 17U would be really fun, but the brands would be in trouble if that was the case. All
Well, I
right.
do think there'd be merit to that as well, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, it'd be interesting. What team ranking or state award winner made you grow the most as a professional?
Hmm. Honestly, I wouldn't say it's one ranking necessarily. I think it's our whole state by state player of the year and team best team in each state. I think that is probably what made me grow the most because you have to think about it. I mean, I came in here to MaxPreps and I'm used to doing team rankings and player rankings and stuff like that, but I'm used to covering the top top tier. You know what I mean? When you break it down state by state, it's really taking a look at not every player, but it's really taking a look at every level of player. The player of the year in a state like Maine or Vermont, no knock on those states, but I'm just, it might not be a kid who's going Division 1. He might not even be playing basketball at the next level. Uh, it's really challenged me to dig in and do the proper research that I need to do because there's always that kid out there that you're going to overlook if you don't go deep enough. If you don't look in those small states per se, because there's some states like California, Georgia, Texas, you're going to look in those states every year for the top teams, top players. They're going to probably most likely be there. But then if you don't look at the smaller states and you don't dig it down to really a deep level, you're going to miss so much when you're trying to cover high school basketball, in my opinion. So I would say those awards really help me to dig down and do my job to the best of my abilities because I'm going to be honest, finding a player of the year in some of those small states is the hardest part of my job sometimes.
Talk about the biggest upset that you've witnessed.
Easily, well, I don't want to say easily because I'm sure there's some that are I'm forgetting about, but when Curie came in and knocked off Montford at the Hoop Hall Classic in 2014, Cliff Alexander put up, I think it was 31 points, 15 rebounds, 5 blocks. The kid was, I mean, I thought he was going to be like the next big thing. I mean, he was incredible. Obviously had some issues and was ineligible at Kansas for a little bit and then, didn't really pan out in the pros. But when I tell you that Cliff Alexander was cannot miss in high school, I mean, this kid took down Ben Simmons, D'Angelo Russell and company, and that Montfort team didn't lose another game all season. They went 27-1, and there wasn't many close games on the schedule. So I would say going into that game, I would have given Montverde about a 25-point favorite in that game. And the fact that Curie could come in there, you know, team from Illinois who, I mean, they're still good every year. Don't get me wrong. They have a great coach. Curie is a well-coached program, but for them to go in there and beat a team like Montverde was absolutely incredible.
Nice. Sounds like an awesome environment, man. Let's talk about an unranked guy or a couple guys based off of, their high school production that you think will have a big year and pop onto some national radars.
Yeah, I think Vince Dawson from Great Crossing, he's going to be a senior this year. He's actually their all-time leading scorer. This school is, I believe, only 4 or 5 years old. So, all-time leading scorer in 4 or 5 years. But I mean, he's also teammates with Malachi Moreno. So, uh, and I would say when I saw them last year, of course, Malachi Moreno stands out. I mean, he's 7 foot and he can grab every rebound there is. But when I tell you that that team doesn't go without both of them, Vince Dawson, I believe, was actually their leading scorer last year. Um, he's a very good player. He's a Division 1 prospect, but he goes under the radar a lot. Very good scorer. Lino Mark for Notre Dame, another one. Angelino Mark. He's going to be a senior this year as well. He has come on to some national radar a little bit. I saw that he was a 3-star on 247 now, whereas last year he wasn't ranked. But man, that kid can go. Along with Tyron Stokes this year, that team's going to be really fun to watch. And they're a team that's on my radar, probably going to be in the top 25 to start the season. And then the third kid is a kid from my home state that I live in now is South Carolina, Yale Davis from Ridgeview. He kind of went under the radar last year as a sophomore. Wasn't talked about too much, and I was looking him up before this, and I don't think he's ranked on any major scouting service. But he's a player who's just productive. He helps Ridgeview win. I mean, Ridgeview, if you watch them play, they're really fun because they don't have a whole lot of big name kids. They just play really, really hard and really, really smart basketball. And he really embodies that and kind of is the stir that or I mean, sorry, the straw that stirs the drink. Um, and I think Ridgeview is going to be in for another really good year this year too.
All right, so I have one more question for you. But before we get to that, I always kick it to my guests to ask them if they have any questions to ask me after doing all this prep work. What you got for me?
So I got a hard ball for you. I got a fastball. The five most influential people in high school basketball in our space,
Ooh, man.
and not like a full reason why, but just like why you feel like they're on the list, why they made the list, like a quick reason for each guy, just a quick one.
You're gonna get me in trouble. Nah, but I think I can answer this one. Um, I would say that number one is just that comes to mind off the top of my head is John Stovall. All the stuff that he does with Nike and a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. I think he's had a hand in creating a lot of the infrastructure for what we have now, with that Scholastic League as well as EYBL. And there's the other two circuits have really good talent as well. I don't want to disrespect them. But that's the first one that comes to mind. Because being in this space, I know that he's kind of the one behind the strings that gets a lot of things done,
For sure.
without necessarily taking the credit. So I kind of respect the way that he moves in that sense. Um, I would say Don Showalter with Team USA.
Mhm.
I really respect the way that, for the most part, they navigate a lot of the politics within the space. There isn't really a ton of times where you see a kid on a Team USA camp roster that you're like, how is he here? I feel like they do a pretty good job of evaluating. They do a pretty good job of bringing in guys that aren't necessarily highly ranked yet, or they fill a role for that team specifically. And I think for the most part, I really like the final rosters that they end up with. Obviously, there's exceptions, but I think he does a pretty good job of that. And then obviously, all the work that he does communicating with college coaches and NBA guys about the guys that he does coach. He's kind of stepped away from coaching and is just kind of managing Team USA. But I mean, he was undefeated with six, I forget what it was, 62-0 with like
They have a
five
ridiculous
gold
record.
medals. I mean, from the jump, he got things rolling, and it's in a really good place now. Um, He's gonna get mad that I'm mentioning him with this group of people. But PD Webb, a good friend of mine that works for Cerebro Sports, very, very, very plugged in within the high school basketball scene, does a lot of work, scouting, not just high school kids, but college kids. And I think he's very fair with his process. And I think he's also very transparent with why he feels the way that he does about certain things. And he's a guy that really does his homework and really does the legwork that good work requires. So I really respect everything that him and Derek Murray do with them. Um, I would say John Lucas, the camps that he runs,
Mhm.
uh, obviously, coming from the NBA space and, creating, rehab situations for players that need it from the league, and then kind of creating his own AAU organization that has been successful for quite some time at every level. And also just the camps that he does a pretty good job of bringing in guys from all across the country to compete in his camps. I've heard that they're pretty high level. Um, and he's always kind of an open ear that a lot of people around me respect. I don't really have a personal relationship with him, but definitely respect what he does. And the last one, believe his name is Shannon Terry. Um, Started Rivals, moved on and started 247 and moved on and building up on three,
Yeah.
um, building, you know, three of, some of the foremost kind of websites that cover what we cover, and kind of doing it with really good talent. Um, I think is building that stuff takes time, and building it the right way that can sustain over time, I think is important too. And I have a lot of respect for people that do national rankings because, man, I get stressed out just doing rankings for Maryland and DC. And then obviously sometimes I cover Virginia as well underneath the prep hoop stuff and then with my OWU hoop stuff. But the national level is a different bear.
I
Definitely
agree.
definitely want to give an honorable mention to Chad Babel, everything he's done with Made Hoops, um, kind of growing the middle school space and really building that up to the level that it's at now. I think that platform is really important for kids to be seen, and kind of in the right spots developmentally down the line. So that would be my answer for that question. That was a good one, man. That was
I like your answers too. They were good answers.
had me on my toes there. So we'll see if that comes back to haunt me. But I think it'll be fine. All right, man. Last question. Really appreciate your time. Really appreciate our friendship too. What do you want your legacy to be? When you do call it quits, whenever that is down the line. I'm sure it's not gonna be anytime soon. What's
Yeah, I
important to
mean,
you?
honestly, for me, like, I feel like a lot of people in the high school space kind of get overshadowed or you know, get overlooked. For me, I think that I want my legacy to really come down to I was fair, I was good at what I did, very thorough, at evaluating talent. I mean, honestly though, my ultimate legacy I think is as a rankings guy, team rankings mainly. I think that's my niche. I think that's what I'm best at. And I think that it's something that, I've often thought about it. And even if I was currently, I mean, obviously I'm only 30 years old, but even if I was, around a retirement age right now, 65, 70, I really don't think I could give it up and just, stop doing what I love because it is something that I really thoroughly enjoy. And I put a lot of time into it and effort. And um, really, I just hope people respect me and can see that, I don't have any dog in the fight. I'm trying to stay out of it, be as unbiased as possible, but at the same time, do the best possible job I can to give these kids a platform and, grow high school basketball to where it can be while, giving fans a kind of, it's kind of like a fantasy look at high school because, there's no exact science to these rankings. It's impossible to sometimes rank a team that might be undefeated from a state that doesn't allow them to travel and play a bunch of teams versus a team that's played a national schedule and has two or three losses. It's almost impossible to compare the two. Uh, you're comparing apples to bananas at that point. It's not really close to the same thing. But the thing that I hope that people really take out of it is I can understand how he got to that, and I can see that there's no, it's not like he's picking this team because he likes this team. That's what I hope is that people respect my process and respect the work I do for high school sports and high school basketball.
I want to throw one last thing at you, just a question that popped into my head. Can you
Yeah.
kind of shout out some of the people that you've learned from the most that have kind of helped you grow within the space that you really respect their work?
Yeah. I mean, so Ronnie Flores is a guy that I look up to. Um, he's probably the one person in the country that I would say, hey, I can understand how he got to his rankings the same way I can understand how I got to mine. Whether our rankings are a little bit different or not, I think that his process makes sense to me, and I think he does a very thorough job. Other people, you know, a guy that doesn't really get any spotlight, but I really respect and I've really learned a lot from over the years is Chick Gillespie. Chick is somebody who, I mean, if you've talked to the guy, he used to go to over 400 high school basketball games a year. So if you can bend a guy like that's ear and, become friends with him and just talk to him, I mean, we've developed a friendship over the years and, he's very dedicated to what he does. And the thing is, Chick isn't doing it for anything other than the kids. I mean, uh, a lot of people don't even know who Chick is. But if I pointed him out to you in the gym, you'd be like, "Oh, I've seen that guy before. I knew who that is."
Seen them
So
everywhere.
he's everywhere. Those two really stand out. My boss currently at MaxPreps, Jason Hickman, he was the basketball editor before me at MaxPreps. Um, and I really respected his work before I worked for MaxPreps. Since I've come on board, he's been nothing but a great I feel like he's really the person who kind of guides me in tough situations. He's a person I can go to with any questions because he's been in my shoes before and he understands the space. And he's been a guy who's really been a mentor to me since I started with Max Preps. And I really respect him. I mean, he does a great job of what he does now. And he also can give me any guidance that I ever need from him.
Awesome, man. Well, really appreciate the time and look forward to tuning into your preseason work. I'm sure we'll touch base a little bit on our on our team rankings before the season gets started.
Oh yeah, I mean, as soon as this meeting's over, I'm gonna have to reach out to you and see who the best teams from the DMV are. You already know that.
We got some good ones, man. Really appreciate the time. Talk soon.
All right, thanks, man.